Thank you, folks, for giving us a chance to speak. I think both of us are extremely excited to be here. I think this is a great space. All of us are very cued in on all the great things that are happening. And what we are hoping to do here is present our perspective from our narrow slice of the world. And one reason we are maybe more excited than other people is AI has been a very big part of AdTech. Like you have Googles and Facebooks of the world who have been driving a lot of this innovation. And arguably, like, the first real world implementation of AI for corporate value is AdTech. And so it's has become a big part of everything that we think about, that we worry about. It's just something that's become critical for us to survive, to be relevant in this ecosystem. And every single problem there, both is exciting and critical for us to solve. And I think this kind of interest in the space is fantastic for us because now there are just more people thinking about these things, helping us solve the challenges that we worry about. Avi, anything that you wanted to add?
No, I think we just want to share a lot of our excitement for the space. I think we're going to cover probably 3 or 4 things. We'll give you a little bit of introduction to where we fit in the mobile advertising world. We'll tell you why we genuinely believe that when it comes to AI innovations, AdTech is going to be one of those driving sectors. What's special about it right now that gives us the ingredients to really innovate with AI? And we'll share with you some of what we think are really exciting prospects, like use cases that we're currently working on that we think will help define the frontier of AI and be hugely relevant in AdTech.
Yeah, thanks, Avi. And all of you might be familiar with InMobi in some shape or form. We've been around for a long time. We'll be celebrating our 10 years shortly in a month or so. And just to give you a little more context of what we do, we are a mobile ad platform. We reach about 1.5 billion unique devices every month. And we have purely mobile global kind of focus, and about 1/3 of our revenue comes from Asia, Europe, the Americas. And in a day, we typically process, 8 to 10 billion ad requests a day, like, just high volume, just high intensity kind of compute. And just from just to provide a little more detail in terms of what it means to be a full mobile platform. What we do here is we basically, as a company, what we do is we connect advertisers with publishers. And it could be in a whole variety of ways, right? Like we could have advertising platforms in terms of a video platform or in terms of an ad network where we bring on both advertisers and publishers, or it could be a data management platform. The key component here is we work with lots of data at very high granularity and very high volume, and across a wide range of use cases. And we have to make we have to make decisions in microseconds to make this whole market work. So we're not just talking about really intelligent systems. We're talking about intelligent systems that are very well operationalized, like been designed from the get-go so they can operate in microseconds and deliver relevant advice to make this ecosystem work. Yeah, and just moving on, right? Like, and I'm sure you've seen this enough times during this conference in terms of, AI is here, and this is what's going to be everything that we could see in the future. I had my own little story here. A couple of weeks ago, I was on 280 in California, and I was on the call with my team. And it was a machine learning call, and we were talking about AI and whatever. And then I looked alongside a car pulled up, and it was a Tesla. And for some reason, I turned to look at it, and there was this man inside, and he was eating a banana, and both hands off the steering wheel. And it was fairly heavy traffic. It's not like, smooth sailing or something. And the car smoothly just overtook me and went. At first, I was really puzzled because I'd not seen that. And then the second emotion that hit me was, I just got overtaken by an AI car. And I was wondering, should I overtake it or should I just let it be? Right? It's just so real, and I'm sure you're seeing it everywhere, but that's a big part of how things are changing so fast.
I think everyone, so Rajiv had his machine overtake moment on the highway, but there won't be long before all of us in whatever roles we're doing or in our sectors have that moment when the penny drops and we realize machines have got to the point that they can do a lot of what we thought was highly valuable in our roles. So you had yours on the card, but I think all of us are going to have our machine overtake moment in some form.
And you've heard this many times before, so I'll gloss over it. But it's becoming very real now. There are a whole bunch of new companies which are developing new business paradigms, which are focused on building sense out of complex data. So basically being able to do optimizations at very high granularity, at great speed, and doing it correctly, better than any human can. And I think that's where opportunities over the next decade will be centered on. And
we'd like to see some more Indian companies in that right-hand box as well. Companies coming from India, just like Chinese companies have started appearing.
And go ahead, Avi.
Yeah, so on the theme of, so why do we think this intersection between ad tech and AI is so promising? Well, I mean, you would have heard probably multiple times this conference, right? Why AI, why now? And people, they talk about data is here in a way that we've never had. They talk about computing power, and they probably talk about some sophistication with the algorithms, right? They throw fancy words around like artificial neural networks and say these are recent innovations. But what's special in ad tech is these 4 reasons. And when we say data, it's not that the data is still to be collected, right? The data is already flowing through the system. And it's data at an individual level, right? At a user level. Like Rajiv mentioned how in the case of InMobi, right, as one of the major ad tech players, we've got 1.5 billion devices that we have access to. That's an enormous data set of individual people that you're able to learn from. That's unique in ad tech. I mean, there are a couple of other sectors that have really effective, well-collected data, but on an individual level, for individuals in society, it's unique in ad tech. The second is you need engineering talent, right? This is not just the job of a data scientist. It doesn't work with a data scientist in the room. You might build great models. You might operationalize them in a static environment. You might get one-off changes, but that's not really what we're talking about when we're talking about AI, systems that are genuinely self-learning and optimizing as they go. You have to be in a company where engineering talent already exists because naturally there's a massive scarcity and that talent's critical to actually build these systems. That talent does exist in ad tech companies, right? Google and Facebook are very well known and we also have an engineering workforce around 350 people. Thirdly, you have to get the top talent in data science and AI drawn into this sector, right? They have to feel there are challenging problems that they can solve and make impact today. Because this talent also is incredibly scarce, right? People who've actually genuinely worked with these algorithms, not just trained on them in classrooms, and optimized them, designed them so they can really work in real environments. And again, I think ad tech is able to do that, attract that talent, both at a leadership level and people who are going to build the stuff down at the ground. And lastly, like this is so critical. So I was formerly a strategy consultant doing advanced analytics in India for a couple of years, supporting companies across manufacturing, automotive, and banking financial services. And yes, it was rife with machine learning use cases, right? I'm sure in the course of this conference, people have thrown all sorts of use case ideas from those sectors and other sectors. But the difference is whether management or the CEO is doing this as a side show bit of innovation or dipping their toe in the water to see does this deliver before they're willing to really invest and willing to scale, or is it a business necessity right now, right? The way that Tesla has been driven, because in order to make battery-powered, energy-efficient cars work, they had to really advance in terms of technology and software equally. And that's the case in ad tech, that everything that we do that makes a difference has an immediate bottom line impact. So the business necessity is absolutely there. And so on the point of data, we talked about like 1.5 billion devices, or really there's globally we're talking about nearly 3-4 billion smartphones. What is that data? Just a show of hands, right? I think hopefully everyone's heard this term, but unstructured data, show of hands, everyone who's heard that term and could explain it reasonably well? Okay, actually, but we're about 20% of us, right? So unstructured data is the big challenge in big data, because structured data is what we conventionally used to think of in a spreadsheet. Broadly, if you can put it into a spreadsheet, it has a nice format and it's like numerical or it's alphanumeric. We think of that as structured data. Unstructured data is all of this ambiguous or very rich data, which we don't immediately instinctively think of as data, that can also provide food to an algorithm. So what do I mean, right? It's, in the case of AdTech, we're talking about ad creatives. We're talking about images that you might collect of consumers. So all image and auditory signals is unstructured data. Notes from people, notes that they might take, right? Whether in an app or in a logbook, that's all unstructured data. It's stuff that you can't fit into a spreadsheet, but actually now we're in a world where algorithms can directly learn from that data, and you don't have to do much data processing to make that possible. So in the case of the mobile ecosystem, right, we all have mobile devices on us, I'm sure. I'm not even going to attempt a show of hands. And on those mobile devices, there are lots of different sensors. Those sensors are all firing up all the time, right? You've all worked with apps that are using your location, or the accelerometer, or the gyroscope on the phone. A lot of that is unstructured data, especially when you now have an iPhone X that has facial recognition, and increasingly you're going to have apps that are reading our faces live. All that's unstructured data. That's all coming through mobile phones. A lot of that can come through mobile phones, and a lot of that's going to be live, as in it's not historically collected, but we're collecting it today and are going to keep growing that asset. And then you've got, right, the other big angle, especially in AdTech in mobile, is you actually have a real high dimensionality data set. You're not just talking about one aspect of someone. I'm not just looking at your location, as great as that is. I'm not just looking at your demographics, but I have that and I have more, right? Any app has the ability to hear your voice, to hear the tones of your voice, hear how you structure your sentences, process that, has the ability to take all those other interesting devices on your phone, like your accelerometer and gyroscope, and get a sense of how you stand, when you sit. So that really rich data also feeds these algorithms in a way that we did not have before.
And how does it apply to InMobi, right? And it could be in many different ways, but for us it's largely in 4 buckets. There's the first bucket, which is just in terms of network hygiene, keeping things clean. Like, 1/3 of the value of an ad network comes from just keeping crap out. And it's not so unrealistic when you think about it, right? Because every click is 5 to 10 rupees, every download is 100 rupees, right? Like if you are a fraudster with relatively little skill, you can make a lot of money, right? So it attracts its fair share of interest. So that's the first bit, which is just keeping crap out. Then there's a second bit, which is in terms of just understanding who your user is. Like, what's your audience? Where do they belong? What do they like? And how can you meet their interests in the most effective way? And then there's a third part, which is relevance, which is, it has multiple components to it. There are a whole variety of people that you're trying to keep happy. There could be users who you want to make sure you're delivering the kind of things that appeal to their interest. There could be advertisers for whom you're trying to make sure that you're trying to, you get to the most engaged users. Or there could be publishers for whom you're trying to make sure that you're generating the maximum possible monetization for them without compromising on their experience. And then there's the last bit, which is just modeling the actual physical interaction between a user and the ad, right? Like, what does the user see? It's the ad. And what does it mean? And how can we do a better job of understanding that interaction and using that to model what could follow from that?
And we should just say, we don't think this is exhaustive in any way. We actually just wanted to pick 4 examples and give you a flavor of those 4. We as a company in Stanley, we're going through an exercise of actually developing a real exhaustive list of all the possibilities. And the real number is nearing 100 just for us, right? Internally and external use cases. But that's really the full potential, perhaps, in any given tech company, maybe a bit less in the traditional sector. So these are just 4 examples.
Absolutely. And I'll just touch a little bit on the fraud algorithm. And what I want to highlight in particular is why this particular component of the network will benefit from AI, just in terms of application. The way fraud works in these systems is that, in general, anywhere, is that it's like an arms race, right? You seal down everything, someone figures out a hack, perpetuates some fraud, then you whack that mole, and then somebody else figures out something else, and so on and so forth. And it's just like an ever-escalating arms race. And the reason AI makes sense here is because one could potentially model a lot of this activity as just unstructured data and try to catch exceptions, try to catch aberrant behavior, and use a lot of these in fact, we do use a lot of these algorithms to actually catch fraud before it gets to any meaningful scale, right? So that's one big application for us. And Avi, would you want to reflect on targeting?
Yeah, so when we think about targeting historically in marketing, is anyone here from the marketing profession? Any raise of hands? One there. And sales? Okay, so a handful. Right. Conventionally, and you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, and not that I have a particularly strong marketing background, but broadly, when we think about segments, right, we look at demographics, we look at location, and we look at buying preferences, very, very broadly. And as a result, marketing, the notion of segments was always quite relatively limited, right? Typically enough that a CEO could also visualize those segments somewhere between 5 to 10, defined by really those variables, maybe a few more increasingly, but broadly those types of variables. Now, when we think of what we can do with segmentation, it doesn't just go beyond that. I think it redefines it, because it's not about anymore that we see a single individual and put them in a bucket. We're really interested in the personal and social context that the individual is going through, and everything we can learn about how someone is interacting with their device that tells us what personal context are they in? Are they rushing between meetings? Are they just waking up in the morning? Are they dealing with a crisis at home that they have to handle? And what social context are they in? Right? What's the social environment? How many influences are they surrounded by right now? Whose opinion they actually care about or who they're influenced by? That leads to this worldview, or this way of thinking about segments where it's not about individuals as segments. We're looking for personas out there in the universe, where personas are many more than the individuals that are out there, and we're targeting those personas at any given second, right? Someone suddenly shows a persona of being a movie junkie at a moment, as in has a real need to want to go see a couple of movies. If we can find that persona emerging in that world of data that we're learning from through mobile devices, that's what's targeted, not just a brute segment of individuals. So that's the direction we think segmentation can go, and especially in this space in AdTech.
Absolutely. And also just to take Avi's thought further in terms of you have users who could have different contexts. They could be in different modes. Context could mean many different things. It could mean like, is this person rushing to work? Is this person just waiting at a bus stop? Is this person just commuting on the train? That's one kind of context. The other kind of context could be that has the user already seen the product? Has the user downloaded something and is waiting for the next interaction? And the question is, very soon it becomes very, very messy and complicated, and every single user, we're talking about 1.5 billion users, right? And you're talking about thousands or even millions of products. And if you're thinking of maintaining state for each of these guys, for each user you're thinking about, how do you think about what they're doing? What do they like? And what have they seen in terms of, what's their experience been so far in terms of each of these products? It suddenly starts becoming numerically intractable, and it starts getting quite messy. And I think that's where a lot of these AI applications come in very, very handy, because they help you address this huge, complex, highly fragmented space. And you can do the right decision, for example, for a user. So suppose you have to choose for a single user across multiple categories, and you have to choose which ad to show him. Do I show him an ad for Flipkart where the user has downloaded the app but has not made a transaction? So do I show him an ad for a product so that he can click on that and buy a product? Or do I show him an ad for Ola in terms of like an app that he's never even seen before? Right? So making those kind of decisions become easier with this technology. And part of the reason why AI has been driven a fair bit by AdTech as well, because this kind of data in AdTech is fairly structured, it's fairly accessible, it's available, you can do experiments, you see direct revenue impact, direct monetization, and so this is a big application area for us.
I mean, we've left the juiciest one for last, which is the creative domain and what's possible in the world of AI meets creativity. So question for you. Who here has heard the results of a machine composing music? In particular, people do this for Western classical music like Mozart and Beethoven. If you've heard an example of that, can you raise your hands? Okay, about 5 people. Who here have seen examples of machines make abstract art? So not just representing something physical, but some kind of emotional, colorful representation. Has anyone seen examples of that? Maybe 2 or 3? Cool. Has anyone seen the example of a machine writing a short story? Yeah? Okay. 3 or 4. And who read the news? It was about roughly 10 days ago. New York, one of the big philharmonic orchestras in New York that were, not New York, it was actually in Germany, my mistake. It was in Germany, where the conductor of the orchestra was a machine. If I'm not mistaken, it was Cologne. You can correct me wrong, but I remember it being Cologne. So about 2 or 3 people. So for me, like those have kind of are real breakthroughs in the creative domain, right? You've got 4 actually incredibly creative areas, which we instinctively believe only a human can achieve that kind of creativity, and you've got some real breakthrough moments. The machines are doing things that often many humans might say are pretty decent quality, if not as good. At least I've heard the Mozart example, and I don't know that much Mozart, but I couldn't make the difference out between real Mozart and the machine. It both sounded great to me. So those moments, those real watershed moments are coming across industries when something that you thought was really creative in the preserve of a human, the machine is going to start doing a good job of it. For us, in advertising, it's the domain of the creative, right? That visualization or that set of content that you put together that helps get your ad message across. It could be in a video form, it could be an image, it could also be audio. But that creative, what we think is possible, we've already seen like early results of how it's possible for a machine to diagnose, and if we look at the next slide, what is it about a creative that makes it work? So a model just takes a creative, in this case like an image of a lady wearing fashion, and is able to identify, predict, is it the case that people are going to click on this or not? So just from that creative, right, just from appreciating the aesthetic of that creative, no surprises, the algorithm that's working here, it's a neural network. This is where most of the innovations are happening. This is what's pushing across all of these areas I talked about. Broadly, just to give you a 10-second overview of what's actually happening that's making this possible, the machine is it's operating on a conceptual as well as a physical, finding the dimensions physically in the image, where it's assembling these conceptual layers that together represent what's happening in the image. So in its simplest form in image recognition, it first is looking for corners in an image, things that define that you have a physical object. Then it might be looking for basic shapes, right? Circles or squares or bulky shapes. Then from those shapes and the other elements in the shape, it might infer a face, it might infer an arm, it might infer a leg. Putting those concepts together, maybe it finds a face, 2 arms, 2 legs, and an abdomen. It goes, oh, that's a human being. And that's very broadly, right, how a machine, in the case of image recognition, is able to parse through something highly visual to be able to recognize it as an object or a person. In the creative domain, we're also experimenting with this, how this works, but in the creative domain, it's on one dimension, it's working, as I said, on the physical, right? It's finding the physical aspects of the image. So it might be able to tell you that put the buy button in the top right versus the top left, a very physical switch. But there's a potential to operate on the conceptual level where it's recognizing that, right, a woman here in this context with a very plain background and where the colors are contrasting has a more eventual powerful effect on the user versus a woman more plain clothed or with a dull background. From this aggregation, you can think of it as of different concepts, it's arriving at a much higher order concept that enables it to make that decision of, is this a good ad or is this not a good ad? Will people click on this? For me, that's why I'm particularly overwhelmed by that, is that it's actually getting to the heart of the human psyche. If you're able to tell how people react to stimulation, right? If you're able to understand that, in this form we're talking about creatives in the ad network, you're actually really understanding how people absorb and learn and sense in a way that I think we've not had before and goes much beyond just simple image recognition. So this is the direction I think that we see a lot of promise in the creative domain. Just as you have images here, right, this is equally possible with video and with audio. Anything that you would add to this, Rajiv?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just harking back to the old time, right? harking back to the old times where we would model just creatives by some identifier or just some label, and then we would do all our analysis on that label kind of thing. It's just an artificial abstraction of what the user actually saw. With this, what we're doing now is we are actually, like Avi was saying too, we are actually reflecting on what did the user actually see, right? And it's the content. Was there a lot of blue in it? Was there a lot of green in it? Was it attractive? Maybe did it have larger text? And doing this learning across millions of creatives and billions of interactions and trying to distill what really works and what doesn't work and what leads to good outcomes and what doesn't. And I just think that kind of thinking is very organic and very beautiful, just in terms of making the whole experience just much more consistent and less jarring than advertising has traditionally been.
I
And
think the big, just to add, like probably the big penny drop moment, we've had our penny drop right on this side of the fence, but probably for anyone in the advertising industry? Anyone in the advertising industry? No. Oh, okay. I think that moment for you in advertising is going to be when a machine designs a creative themselves, right, end to end, with basic inputs, but no creative inputs. Might be told about the users, etc., but no creative inputs. And you see a fully generated creative, normally something that we think that only artists can do from a machine. I think that will be your moment, and I don't think that's far.
Absolutely. And this is the zero moment of truth. And I mean, it's a fancy phrase, but what it really means is that given that we have absolutely no data on how a creative, or no prior data on how a particular creative performs, can we predict how it will do right off the bat, just by looking at the image, right? And so we've been doing that, and it's just working out incredibly beautifully. And just the deep learning technology that we're using for this, it just works beautifully out of the box, and just speaks to the potential and the kind of impact that these kinds of advances have been making and will continue to have in the space.
Yeah, I think just as you're saying, the imperative to actually understand what's going on with this technology in any company that you work for, any sector, and think through afresh, right? If I've seen image recognition or natural language processing work, what is something analogous in my line of work where there's opportunity, where I want to get a team cracking? We have data, we have opportunity, we have the right technology, and I want to get a team cracking to solve it. Just as we've been very excited about this space and invested heavily to make it so.
I think that's from us. Would love to, thanks for this opportunity. Would love to take questions. Sure, please.
Two questions. One is that the creative, the CTR on the creative, it will be a function of the segment to which it is shown as well. So does the algo take into account that as well, and how is it available? I've never heard of this thing, because this is a big challenge always, that whether this creative will work or not. How do we understand? Like, what is the tool? Or how
Absolutely, it's a great point. And the way we handle it is we have one set of models which work just on the creative, which spit out creative features, right? And it's not in any representation that is human understandable. It's just a bunch of vectors that comes out from that. And then, in addition, in our training models, we also train a separate or similar model on a set of segment features, like which publisher, which device, which context, what time of day, and things like that. And then we put it together to generate a prediction. But what we do on just the raw creative is, you can think of it as a potential score for the creative, which kind of tells you how well it does on a scale of 1 to 10 or something like that, right? And closely
Also,
correlated with CTR.
Yeah, and maybe I think part of your question is hinting, how do we bring those 2 points together on whether the creative works and does it work for this segment? We have seen like large numbers of creatives out there in the mobile ecosystem, right? Over nearly 5 or 6 years now in high volume. And we know the customers that we're clicking on them. So you know the connection of the customer segments and how the creative is working on those segments. And at one level, you look at, okay, what makes a good creative without knowing your customer? Maybe, and there's some broad principles that are emerging, right? Broadly, these colors, for instance, always only work on mobile. But then that matching happens because we have data that tells us, when I put it in front of you as a particular customer, sitting in Bangalore, being a man, and 10 other things about you, you either clicked or you didn't click. which is that signaling that enables us to train the algorithm to then ultimately design end goal, design a creative targeted to you as a segment. Does that answer your question?
The way the service is available, or how is the engagement to get this service, for example?
How'd you build this stuff?
So, no, right now it's mostly for our internal systems. At some point, once we've gotten it to sufficient maturity, we'd love to expose it for people to use it. Other questions?
Hi, thanks for sharing your knowledge. So I just had one question. So with ever increasing the evolution of targeted advertising, there's this another layered topic of cognitive resistance towards advertising. So basically for companies to know how much advertising is too much advertising, if machine learning has been able to crack that.
Absolutely. It's a great, it's one of my favorite topics, and it's a great question, right? Which is, when does advertising become intrusive, and how do you respect user preference, right? And from InMobi's point of view, the way we model it is in terms of a concept that we call negative targeting, and it operates at multiple levels. And what we do is we track at a user level if fatigue has set in for particular advertisers or particular time of the day, if because the user is actually making a very strong statement by not responding to the ads, right? Like in terms of saying, look, I don't care for these ads. And if you don't respect that, you're going to end up in a position which is not tenable. And so what we do is, so we have entire negative targeting pipeline with like very sophisticated algorithms in that, which kind of work at a user level to figure out what's the right user experience for him or her. And what it, interestingly, like if you want to take this further, what it ends up becoming is every user has a distinctive fingerprint in terms of what kind of ads they like. There might be some people who like video ads, some people who just don't like ads. There might be some people who love ads of beautiful cars. There might be other people who can tolerate ads from 3-4 categories, or but love. And so it's just like understanding that, again, finely grained structure is what ML thrives on. And I'm actually very excited about the opportunity to just push on this particular topic to make ads a much more interesting experience.